My husband forced me to host his family every night while pregnant. When I snapped, his parents called me immature for not serving dinner. Everything really kicked off a couple of weeks ago when I found out I was 4 weeks pregnant. My husband and I were over the moon, and to share our excitement, we threw a little dinner party just a few days after we got the news so we could tell both our families. But the problems began not long after that. Members of his family started popping in nearly every other day, and without fail, he'd ask them to stay for dinner no matter what was going on. We don't have a maid or a cook, so naturally, I was the one stuck making all the meals. That might have been okay if I wasn't still working full-time. I'm not due for maternity leave until much later in the pregnancy, so right now, I'm juggling work and everything else. I can't keep coming home from a long day at the office just to entertain guests and cook for whoever he decides to invite at the last minute. It's too much. Even after I told him clearly that I wasn't okay with it, he just kept doing it over and over again. We've been together for 4 years and married for about a year and a half, and he's always been close to his family, which I've never minded. But this was getting completely out of hand. His parents, his uncle's family, and his sister all live just a few blocks away from us, so it's super easy for them to drop by whenever they feel like it. Before I got pregnant, they'd visit maybe twice, sometimes 3 times a month. Back then, I didn't mind cooking for them. It was part of my share of household duties, and the visits were spaced out enough that we still had some privacy. But ever since we made the pregnancy announcement, their visits ramped up like crazy. Instead of everyone coming together once in a while, different relatives started showing up on different days. One day it'd be his parents, then a couple of days later it'd be his sister's crew, and then maybe his uncle's family, and sometimes even more distant relatives. It became exhausting. I was suddenly cooking for a bunch of people way more often than I ever had to before. Then, just a couple of days ago, I completely lost it. His sister, her husband, and their kids had stopped by. They weren't planning to stay for dinner at first, but of course, my husband started pushing them to stick around. I wasn't even in the room when it happened, but I could hear him insisting, and I could feel my frustration boiling. I got up, walked out to talk to him privately and shut this down. Only, before I could pull him aside, he turned to me and said I should go ahead and serve dinner. Then his sister chimed in, listing off what she wanted to eat. That was it for me. I snapped. I told them to make it themselves. I didn't wait for their reaction. I stormed back into the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. I caught a glimpse of their shocked faces before I walked out, but in that moment, I just couldn't hold my temper any longer. This had been going on far too often, and I was fed up, not just with him for being so clueless and entitled, but also with his family, who couldn't seem to take a hint. They could have at least declined dinner once in a while out of basic courtesy. A few minutes after my outburst, my husband came into our bedroom to confront me. He looked pretty upset, but I wasn't about to say sorry. I had already told him multiple times that I was not okay with his family constantly dropping by. I reminded him that I'm pregnant, working full-time, and starting to deal with morning sickness. Coming home and having to host dinner for 5 or 6 extra people every other day was not something I could keep doing. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down and said I should have just talked to him privately if I had a problem. According to him, I embarrassed not just him, but also his sister and her husband, and he thought I owed them all an apology. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had tried to keep this between us, but he ignored every concern I raised. I had spoken to him more than once about how hard this was on me, and neither he nor his family seemed to care. If they think it's okay to expect a pregnant woman to play hostess after working all day, that's their issue, not mine. I had reached my limit. I was irritated, hormonal, exhausted, and instead of supporting me, my own husband was worried about what his family might think of him. As soon as I told him I wasn't going to apologize, he lost his cool. He started yelling at me, calling me disrespectful, saying I embarrassed him in front of his sister and her husband, and now his parents were going to find out. I tried to explain everything, how I felt, how tired I was, how I had been trying to set boundaries, but he wouldn't hear it. He just kept pushing, and eventually I gave up. I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. I turned away from him and started packing a bag. That caught his attention, and he told me I couldn't just run away from the situation. But I didn't care. I kept packing, and he left the room, sulking off to the living room. Once I was ready, I called a cab and headed to my parents' place. He saw me leave, sitting right there on the couch, and didn't say a word to stop me. It's been a few days now, and he still hasn't tried to contact me. He did, however, reach out to my parents. When I first showed up at their door, they were totally confused, so I told them everything. They agreed with me. They said I was right to react the way I did. But they also said that we still needed to deal with the situation, and that not talking wasn't going to solve anything. I told them straight up, I'm not going to reach out unless he's willing to apologize. So yesterday, they decided to call him themselves and try to knock some sense into him. After my parents spoke with him on the phone, They gave me an update, and it honestly made me feel even worse. Apparently, my husband didn't budge at all. He told them flat out that he wasn't even willing to hear my side of the story. He said it didn't matter what I was dealing with, because in his eyes, the way I acted was totally unacceptable. He literally said there was no excuse for my behavior and painted me as some kind of immature brat who had thrown a tantrum instead of acting like an adult. His main issue seemed to be that I lost my temper in front of his family. According to him, I should have just bottled everything up and waited to talk about it later, privately. To make things worse, he even accused me of trying to distance him from his family just because I don't like them. That really hit a nerve. I don't think I did anything wrong, and frankly, that accusation is just ridiculous. I told him to make dinner himself if he was so eager to play host. What's so outrageous about that? Update 1. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who left comments and advice on my post. Seriously, thank you. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't overreacting. After hearing what my parents told me from that phone call, I had honestly started doubting myself. My husband had sounded so confident and convincing when talking to them that I began to second-guess everything. But the more I think about it, the more I see just how entitled he's been acting. We both work full-time corporate jobs and usually get home around the same time. When we moved in together a couple of years before we got married, we agreed to split the housework evenly, and for the most part, we stuck to that. I've never had a problem cooking. In fact, I actually enjoy it. It's something I find relaxing. Cooking for two is no big deal. Even when we had guests, either from his side or mine, I didn't mind handling meals. What I took issue with was how often he expected me to drop everything and cook for a houseful of guests while I was pregnant and struggling with morning sickness. It felt like I was being treated like a live-in maid. And when I finally stood up for myself, even once, he made me out to be the problem. Some people in the comments said his family had nothing to do with this, but I strongly disagree. They know I'm pregnant. They know I'm dealing with nausea and fatigue. They know I work just as many hours as he does. And still, they kept accepting his dinner invitations and expecting me to cater to them like it was no big deal. His mom has been pregnant before. So has his sister. They're both working women. They have to know what it's like. So it's hard for me to believe they were totally clueless about how exhausting this has been. If they're so big on family values, wouldn't that include looking out for a pregnant woman in the family too? And then there's the whole "you're trying to isolate him from his family" nonsense. If I really didn't like his family, I would have made that clear long before now. I wouldn't have spent the last few years cooking for them, welcoming them into our home, and tolerating all the drop-ins. If I had an issue with them, I wouldn't have waited until I was pregnant to show it. That's just common sense. But none of that matters anymore. I've made up my mind, I'm not going back unless he apologizes. And if that apology never comes, then I guess I'll need to start talking to a lawyer. Update 2. It's been a week now since I left, and still, there's been zero effort from my husband to contact me. I haven't reached out either. So at this point, it's starting to look like I may need to seriously explore my legal options. What really sealed it for me was a phone call I got from his parents. At first, they tried to act supportive. They said they were aware of the incident and knew that my husband and I hadn't spoken for several days. My mother-in-law told me she understood how I was feeling. She even sounded somewhat sincere at first. But then she said that even though I wasn't completely wrong, she believed I had overreacted. She backed up her son, saying he was right to expect me to apologize to his family. She told me to imagine how I'd feel if my husband had spoken to my family that way. Then she started talking about how marriage takes effort and compromise, and that I should swallow my pride, go back home, and patch things up. According to her, this was all just a petty disagreement, not something worth leaving over, especially now that I'm pregnant. Hearing that was honestly infuriating. Everything she was saying to me, she should have been saying to her son. If she truly understood where I was coming from, she would have recognized that my reaction was justified. And if marriage is such hard work, then why is it too much to expect her son to actually put in that work, especially when he's clearly in the wrong? He knows I'm pregnant. And yet he hasn't checked in, hasn't called, hasn't shown the slightest concern. This baby isn't just mine, it's his too. But the way he's acting, you'd think he has nothing to do with it. He seems to believe that no matter how he behaves, I should just forgive and forget. And clearly, his parents feel the same way. What I don't understand is why I'm the one expected to let everything go. He's the one who kept putting me in this situation, even after I asked him to stop. I was doing all the cooking, all the emotional labor, and all I asked for was some breathing room. I tried to explain this during that phone call, thinking maybe his parents would finally understand. But nope. The second I began to explain, they cut me off and started accusing me of making excuses for my behavior. They told me it was childish to run back to my parents' house and expect things to magically get better. They said I needed to go back to my husband and fix things, because in their view, I was the one who caused this whole mess in the first place. Apparently, they think I dragged my parents into it just to manipulate him into saying sorry. So I had to set the record straight. I never asked my parents to call him. They did that on their own. And they didn't even tell him to apologize. They just wanted him to talk to me, to break the silence, and maybe start fixing things. While my in-laws were giving me their little lecture over the phone, I finally cut them off and told them they were wasting their breath. If they had something to say, they should be saying it to their son, because I was done listening. I guess that hit a nerve with my mother-in-law, because she suddenly switched gears and started calling me names. That was the last straw, so I hung up. I wasn't going to sit there and take verbal abuse from anyone. Up until that moment, my anger had been directed mostly at my husband. But now, with his family chiming in and showing their true colors, my frustration was spreading. I had already been toying with the idea of speaking to a lawyer, but I'd held off. I didn't want to jump to something I couldn't take back over what might have just been one bad fight. The only reason I was holding back was because of the baby. I didn't want to throw away everything we'd built just because things got heated. But now it's clear, my husband's willing to let it all fall apart, and so is his family. If I'm being honest with myself, I don't see any reason to wait any longer. At first, I was staying for the baby. But now I'm walking away for the baby. I don't want to raise my child in a home where I'm disrespected, unappreciated, and constantly ignored. So, thanks to their behavior, I've finally made up my mind. I'm filing for divorce. As for custody, I'm not looking to keep him away from his child. He can spend as much time as he wants with the baby. I won't stand in the way of that. But on a personal level, this marriage is over. Update 3. It's been 9 days since I last posted, and after that awful phone call from my in-laws, I officially started looking for a divorce lawyer. Through a friend, I got in touch with someone she trusted, and within a few days, we started the filing process. Yesterday, my husband was served. And just like I expected, that's when he finally decided to call me. He sounded stunned, like he didn't think I'd actually go through with it. He asked me if I really wanted to end the marriage. It was hard to say yes. I won't lie, I loved him deeply for years. But love alone isn't enough. There has to be mutual respect, and clearly, that was missing. If he respected me at all, he wouldn't have treated me the way he did. He wouldn't have hurled those accusations at me or ignored how overwhelmed I was. I told him straight, I am going through with it. After hearing what his parents had to say, and the way he completely froze me out afterward, I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. They showed me exactly who they are. But even more than that, his silence spoke volumes. If he had just reached out once after I left, just one call, one message, maybe I would have reconsidered. But he didn't. He chose to give me the cold shoulder like I was some child who needed to be taught a lesson. It felt manipulative. I also told him how hard it's been to recognize the man he's become since I got pregnant. It's like I don't even know him anymore. If he won't even speak to me, then how are we supposed to make this work? I gave it time. I waited. And even after filing, a part of me still hoped he'd reach out. But he didn't say anything meaningful on the phone, not even an apology. Once I explained how I felt, the only thing he asked was whether I was planning to go for full custody. I said no. And just like that, he hung up. No goodbye, no emotion, just gone. That was all I needed to know. We're done. And at least now I can accept that without second-guessing myself. He made it clear he's not going to say sorry, no matter what. And you know what? Fine. I can respect that. At least now we're both on the same page. Update 4. So, he's not contesting the divorce, and while that's a huge relief, it also really hurts. I never imagined things would end like this. But here we are. We've started mediation already, though it's just to sort out custody. Since we kept our finances separate from the beginning, the division of assets isn't an issue. Neither of us has any outrageous demands, so the legal part of the divorce should go smoothly. We've even come to a verbal agreement about most of it, now we just need to get it down on paper and finalize everything. The tricky part is going to be custody. Since the baby hasn't been born yet, and the divorce will be finalized before the due date, we can't exactly take turns with a newborn. It's just not practical to have a baby bouncing between two homes every week. Right now, we're leaning toward letting the baby live with me full-time for the first few years. I'll be staying at my parents' house, so he'll always know where to find us. He can come by whenever he wants to spend time with the baby. At this stage, a newborn is going to need their mother more than anyone else, so that's just something we're keeping in mind. It's not ideal, but we're trying to make the best of a tough situation. And honestly, I already know it's going to be hard having him around every other day after the baby comes. But that's something I'll deal with when the time comes. I'm pretty sure his family is going to start visiting too once the baby's born, but that's just something I'll have to handle when the time comes. So far, we've kept things civil during mediation, and I really hope we can continue with that same level of maturity once everything's finalized. There's no room for negativity now, not with a baby on the way. Update 5. Hey again, so it's been a few months since I last checked in. I'm now in my third trimester and officially on maternity leave. A lot has happened since then. I haven't heard a word from my in-laws or anyone else from my husband's family. The only person I've really kept in contact with outside of my own family and friends has been my husband, or I guess I should say soon-to-be ex-husband. Honestly, I had forgotten just how badly things ended with his family until they randomly called me a few days ago. I picked up the phone and greeted them like nothing was wrong, just out of habit, I guess. That seemed to throw them off a bit. A few seconds in, I remembered our last argument, so I toned it down. But by then, the conversation had already taken on a polite, calm tone. They didn't exactly apologize, but they did say they regretted how everything turned out. They even brought up our last fight and admitted they could have handled things better. Again, not a direct apology, but I took it as close enough. I told them it was all water under the bridge and that it wasn't a big deal anymore, because truthfully, it really isn't. With everything going on in this divorce, the baby, I don't have the energy to hold grudges. They seemed relieved that I wasn't holding it against them, and they told me how much it would mean if I allowed them to be part of the baby's life. I knew what they were really saying, that despite everything, they wanted to stay involved and be active grandparents. And I said yes. I told them they were welcome to visit after the baby was born. It's easier to say that now because I'm staying at my parents' house, where we have a housekeeper and my mom takes care of most of the cooking. I'm not burning myself out anymore, so having visitors isn't nearly as overwhelming. I could have been petty and told them no, but honestly, now that I'm about to become a mom, I'm trying to be a better version of myself. I don't want to carry old grudges into this new chapter of my life. That means learning to let go, even of people who've pushed me to my limit in the past. Update 6. Hi everyone, just wanted to share that the divorce was finalized a couple of weeks ago. And just a few days ago, I gave birth to my son. My family was there, of course, but so was my husband and his family. There was this emotional moment when he held our son for the first time. For a little while, it felt like we were those same two people we used to be before things started falling apart. He's been staying with us at my parents' house ever since, just so he can spend as much time as possible with the baby. He's in the guest room, we're not sharing space or anything, but he's here, and I can tell he wants to be involved. He even came over a few days before my due date because he didn't want to miss a second of the birth. And honestly, seeing him like that, it stirred up a lot of emotions I thought I had buried. What really got me, though, was that first night after the baby was born. He was helping me out quietly, respectfully, and then he finally apologized. He told me he was truly sorry for everything. He admitted that he hadn't realized how hard things had gotten for me, and by the time it finally clicked, it was already too late. I had already filed. He said that not fighting for me was probably the worst decision he's ever made. I had to hold myself back from breaking down. I didn't want to cry in front of him, but it hit me like a truck how much we've lost, and how much we might have saved if he had only said those words sooner. I'm not saying I think we can just snap back to being how we were. That's not realistic. Right now, I'm focused on being a mother. That's my priority. But still, a small part of me wonders if there's a chance. If we ever truly loved each other once, and we both still care about this child, maybe, just maybe, there's a way to come back from this. He's been wonderful so far. And if there's even the slightest possibility of us rebuilding, for our son's sake and for ourselves, I want to try. For now, I'm just thankful to be a mom. That's all I need in this moment. But who knows what the future holds?